MSSP Mental Health, minimizing stress and burnout, and Know Your Enemy, gathering intel on the ransomware as a service business model. That and the latest news and trends in the managed security space coming right up on Cyber for Hire.
Building bridges between managed security providers and their clients, it's the podcast where MSPs, vCISOs, and end users take a united stand against cybercrime. This is Cyber for Hire.
Chasing false positives, battling alert fatigue, finding the proverbial needle in a haystack. It all leads to cybersecurity staff burnout and increased security risk. Check out Managed XDR from NetSuri. NetSurian's open XDR platform unifies your telemetry for wider attack surface coverage, deeper threat detection, and ultimately faster incident response. And NetSurian SOC empowers your team by doing the heavy lifting with continuous monitoring, proactive threat hunting, and guided remediation. Looking for a true partner instead of another vendor? Visit msspalert.com/NetSurian. You know what's frustrating about managing security as an MSP? It's knowing that even after you've reviewed a system, firewall, or endpoint to make sure it's secure, it can still change the next day and you might never find out. Let me tell you, that sucks. That's why I want to tell you about LionGuard. See, some vendors talk about being a single pane of glass, but LionGuard actually delivers. They pull data from over 70 systems, use automation to detect changes, and alert you about the things that matter via a ticket in your PSA. If you truly want to secure your customers, visit msspalert.com/LionGuard to check it out for yourself or sign up for a demo today. All right, welcome to episode number 8 of Cyber for Hire. How's everybody doing today? I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media in New York, and joining me today on the other side of the continental divide is my very peripatetic co-host and partner in cybercrime, Ryan Morris, Principal Consultant with Morris Management Partners. Welcome, Ryan. Last week it was Athens. This week, Thailand, I believe. Is that not correct?
You are correct. And by the way, excellent $3 word that you used there. Hopefully everybody, they can learn something about cybersecurity from us today, but also a little vocabulary lesson. But yes, in a world of 3 years of not getting on airplanes and going anywhere, back-to-back weeks of going to Europe and then going to Asia, you know what? You learned that jet lag is a muscle, and that thing needs some exercise.
Absolutely. Well, we'll talk about your travelogue podcast another time, but today we'll stick to cyber. Plenty to cover today, as always, but of course, some news is just so important that it can't wait, which is why we want to share with everyone what's top of mind today. So here's your headline. A joint alert from CISA, the NSA, and the MSISAC warns of malicious use of legitimate remote monitoring and management software after discovering a financially motivated APT campaign leveraging the RMM tools AnyDesk and ConnectWise Control. The malicious activity was spotted on 2 federal civilian executive branch networks as part of the campaign. The actor was sending fake help desk phishing emails to victims' personal and government email addresses. The emails would either contain a link to the malicious domain or a phone number to call the criminals, and this would get victims to download the RMM solutions as self-contained portable RMM executables that can launch locally without administrator approval or installation. So, Ryan, why should this be top of mind today for MSSPs?
You know what? It's top of mind because it strikes at the existential value proposition for being an MSSP. The reason our business model is unique, it is valuable to our customers, and it is scalable for us as the deliverers is remote access. Literally, we use tools, and we've spent a couple of decades building good technology that would allow us to deliver the kinds of sophisticated real-time service interventions that are usually reserved for on-prem delivery. We can do that from anywhere, right? Build a SOC, build a NOC, do it from your office anywhere, literally in the world, as long as you have an internet connection and a client that allows you access to their systems. We exist and provide both financial advantages and technological advantages to our customers. This is the kind of a hack that speaks not only to the overriding questions of, hey, there's a lot of security threats out there, but literally at the heart of why we are different and why a customer would choose to do business with us. I think this is something that even if it's not your RMM, even if it is not directly affecting you and your customers, this is the kind of stuff that strikes at the emotional center of the value proposition. So we all really need to be paying attention to this.
Yeah, almost two lessons here. One is, of course, mind your RMM tools and be sure to understand the risks around that. Second lesson, also from a security awareness perspective, the phishing tactic that was used here. It's becoming a lot more common to do these help desk impersonations where they might actually lure you over to a phone call and go from email phishing to voice phone based phishing, where there actually will be a live person on the phone that can socially engineer you into giving away some key information.
See, you're right on the heart of the issue here. What feels right in our world, if people listen to us and our basic advice as MSSPs, the first thing we want people to do is to just stop clicking on stuff, right? Like, please don't click links that you don't know exactly where they go to, because there could be malicious payloads behind that. In this case, they didn't, right? They went into a different medium. It was a social engineering play that went into the normal flow of business. Of course, there's help desk interactions. Of course, we're going to talk to the people who provide us with that kind of cybersecurity support or technology infrastructure support. This feels perfectly normal, and that's exactly why it's so dangerous and effective. A quote from an article that we're linking to here in this topic as we get to the idea of this headline. The bad guys aim to exploit trust relationships in MSP networks and gain access to a large number of the victim MSP's customers. Okay, if we do it well, right? You've listened to our advice. You've heard it all along. If you're doing it well as an MSSP, your relationship is not based on technology. It is based on trust and reliable, repeatable business process with human connections. Even if we can automate everything there is to deliver in the services that we provide for our customers, the best practice is don't automate everything, because they still need to talk to us. They need to have human interaction. It builds trusted relationships. And it's right on the back of that investment, the emotional connections that we strike in a successful MSSP. That's exactly how they get exploited on the back end. This is one of those cases where, we read a lot of headlines about scary things that go on in the threat universe. This is one where, contrary, if you think about the advice we give, it's usually like, if you're doing it well, you're fine. And then all the people who aren't measuring up to the standard, you need to do a little bit better. The irony here, and it's cruel, is that the more you are following best practice, the more engaged and integrated in an emotional relationship you are with your customers, the more likely they are to be vulnerable to this kind of phishing. As you said, Bradley, pay attention to your RMM. Make sure that you have that stuff rock solid locked down, but also let's make sure that our humans are talking to their humans and that we have something distinctive in the way we interact, whether that's reminding people about the nature of the relationship, or using certain branded phrases, certain audio cues when we're talking to people. We have to take that to another level. Technology will not solve this problem. It needs to be done at the human trusted relationship level.
Very well put, Ryan. Well, that's going to be our top of mind hot take for the day. Do you agree or disagree? We want to hear from you. Please write us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com, and we might share your opinion in a future episode. We'll have more news later for you in the show, but first it's time for our featured MSP industry news topic, presenting our big idea in business: MSSP mental health, minimizing stress and burnout. The life of a cybersecurity professional is not for the faint of heart. The job can be stressful, sometimes thankless. And when an attack transpires, you can work long hours knowing the fate of your employer is on the line, or in the case of an MSSP, the fate of your client. You might even argue that being a managed security services provider magnifies the stress and burnout factor because you must answer to multiple companies at once, all with high expectations of you. With that in mind, this session will examine key policies and strategies that you can institute to relieve employees of this burden, plus how to manage cybersecurity professionals through a security crisis or a difficult time to minimize the emotional toll. Which brings us to the excellent guest that we have today to speak on this topic, someone who can bring the perspective of both CISO and a managed services leader. He's Jason Lewkowicz, Executive Vice President and Chief Services Officer at Optiv, with more than 2 decades of experience in IT and security, including risk governance, crisis management, security and IT transformation, outsourcing, and operations. Jason is responsible for leading Optiv's services organization and evolving its overall capabilities. He's previously served as global CISO at Cognizant Technology Solutions and deputy CISO at Accenture, where he was instrumental in building, developing, and transforming the firm's information security organization, leading a team of more than 100 security operations and response professionals. Jason joined me in a separate interview for this segment. So, gentlemen, if you please roll the tape. Jason, I'm so very glad you could be here today. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, Bradley. Great to be here.
So let's just start by having you explain a little bit about some of the background and experience you have that gives you such a great perspective on this topic. Why we chose to have you on today, because I know you can address this issue really through multiple lenses.
Yeah, sure. So the background, I think for me in terms of what gives me credibility to be here, I started my career in security right after Accenture and many organizations experienced the Melissa virus. And I think that was the first time I had kind of this aha moment around how technology could be used for bad things. One of the key takeaways that I had from that event, and then many events to follow, was the stress that a cyber crisis can place on individuals as well as an organization from the top down. As I transpired through my career at Accenture, I was responsible for the incident response program for about 17 years, working on numerous different types of events, all the way up to the pandemic when I had rolled off and joined Cognizant. Many different times of stress, and there were things that I had done with my teams to ensure that they were getting appropriate breaks to recharge and revive themselves. And the same thing was done at Cognizant. I had the both fortunate and unfortunate experience of joining the day after they publicly announced their Maze breach. And now as a managed service provider, I see similar things where we will have individuals get far over capacity, leading to burnout and, of course, emotional stress. So a bit about my background. At Optiv, I now have responsibility for a little more than 1,250 people across 3 countries, managing a few hundred clients. So it's exciting. And like I said, great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to getting to the part of the discussion where we talk a little bit more about some of the policies you can institute to help relieve some of the stress. But before we do that, let's set the stage even a little bit more. Obviously, mental health is important for everyone, regardless of what line of business you're in. And it's maybe hard to compare industry to industry just anecdotally, but can you give us a sense of, in cybersecurity, how big of a problem is the issue of stress and mental health? And do you agree with the premise that I set forth as well, that, if you're in MSSP, it might even be exponentially more difficult to deal with stress because of the fact that you're not just dealing with the one company and one boss, but really you're answering to a lot of different organizations at once.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the triangle square. You can have one that's both, but not the other that's not. Where like the square can't be a triangle. I think in the context of managed service providers, you're right. You're dealing with multiple different clients, and as I like to think about it, personalities. Where one client could be very demanding, you have another client that's far easier to engage with and have different expectations. Where it comes to play, and everybody is well aware of the war on talent, the great resignation that took place through 22. Now we have this financial situation going on in the world where the markets are very volatile. It's leading to over-pressurization, I think, across the security stack. And I'm absolutely seeing it in our managed services place where we have individuals that are working beyond, I would say normal capacity. And there's a point where you can compensate and you can incentivize to a certain extent, but beyond that leads itself to burnout. I think the mental health piece comes into play where there is the stress demands of life, which then goes to affordability of things and being able to maintain lifestyle and provide for family, and then coupled in the overstress of all of this extra work that comes to play. And then you sprinkle in atop that the different personalities that you have to engage with on a different basis. So it's been interesting to see. We've made some shifts left and right in terms of how we align individuals to personalities, we have people who thrive in those demanding situations. So, how can we shift things left and right? But I would say post-pandemic, stress levels across the board in security are way up. And I don't think it matters where in the organization you sit, from practitioner to leader. And with that comes mental health challenges. How do you decouple? How do you de-stress? There you go.
Yeah. I mean, have you personally seen, the impact in terms of, are you, familiar with instances of people, even just, walking away from the job, whether they quit a position they were at, or maybe they decide, being a CISO isn't for me. Maybe I have to take a less stressful path, maybe go into, academia or something like that instead. I think the stress is one of the biggest factors for why sometimes it can be so hard to retain talent in cyber for so long.
Absolutely. So I'm going to give you the micro and then the macro. The micro focused on myself. As I talked about in that first instance that I worked on, I was very aware of the stress that comes because I'm someone who likes to dive in and run as hard as I can. And not having the self-awareness at the time, being relatively young, I didn't realize that I had kind of reached capacity, and then you start seeing productivity and quality slide off. Dealing with some of the breaches, the Maze breach as an example at Cognizant, the amount of hours that I was working was absolutely leading itself to high levels of stress where I was finding I was snapping at my family, I was irritable, I was feeling depressed, like I wasn't adding value. And it wasn't until a close friend of mine had called me and said, I'm starting to notice a change. I think it's tied to the amount that you're working. And that's when it kind of clicked like, okay, I realize in my role, I'm going to probably have to work 12 to 15 hours a day, given what's going on. It is what I signed up for, but is there a way to break it up where I'm doing 5 3-hour shifts or 3 4-hour shifts where I'm getting a break and disengaging, allowing my brain to recharge itself, perhaps exercising, getting food? People don't realize this. I actually had to create a process in a past life's playbook where it said at a 4-hour increment, you must go get food. Make sure you're telling your teams to get food. Now, that's at the micro. So I've experienced it, and it's something that I do feel passionate about. And when we go in, and I realize this is an MSSP now, I'm flipping into our incident management stuff. But when we're talking to clients and doing tabletop exercises and looking at their playbooks, I will ask, do you have in here a limit on the amount of hours somebody can work? Like what's max, what's min? Do you have broken in breaks? Do you have a protocol where leaders are reaching out and asking, do you have what you need? Do you need to take a break off? We would even go as far as to get hotel rooms near where we were doing the war room so that people could go and recharge. And then
interesting.
At the macro, I do a lot of mentorship for CISOs and individuals who want to get into the CISO track. And the first question I ask them is why? What is it that you think? Most people, the first resonance is to money. It's gonna result in a high paycheck. It's a prestigious role. Most individuals don't realize the stress that comes with a CISO. And personally, and talking to the community, it's oftentimes a thankless job. And humans by nature are looking for validation, hearing the words "good job," and it's not really something that you hear an awful lot.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and obviously, just having that kind of reassurance or getting that positive feedback can make such a big difference to at least, underscore the fact that your work is being appreciated, because there is this sense sometimes of not really being appreciated for all of the hard work and effort that you're putting in. So since you started talking a little bit about just some of the policies that you began by instituting for yourself, but then as a leader also then started introducing to your organization as a whole, give me what you would say are some of your top recommendations and practices for what you can do to make sure that mental health is being accounted for during these long and sometimes strenuous work days. So one we understand is you have to take breaks. So you're going to, even if it's a 12-hour day, you're going to do it in shifts, right? So that would be one. What are some of the other policies that you would personally recommend?
So I would look at it more as an SOP, so a process over a policy. But in process, in the context of dealing with an incident, I would have in the actual playbook a component around personnel. And in that, it would be specific things that you would want to implement given the type of incident that you're dealing with and how long it's going to take to resolve. And that is, does it make sense to have hoteling for the individual so they have the ability as quickly as possible to get somewhere to rest? Second would be nourishment. Does it make sense to bring food in if you're doing a in-place war room, or do you want to break in specific breaks or focus in specific breaks, ensuring that individuals are getting the away time from the asset, the laptop, their asset, so that they can recharge a bit? The last thing would be that maximum of shift. So there has to, I have found for most individuals, 12 hours is about the capacity that they have, where beyond that, even with those breaks, they start falling off in quality and productivity. And when dealing with an incident, that becomes challenging. So that's the incident management piece. If I shift to the right in the managed services space, I like to look at everything through metrics and goals. As we look at how we process managed services personnel, so as we're looking at staffing components, we should have ratios that say, Bradley should be able to handle 5 tickets per hour, an 8-hour shift. He should be handling 40. If all of a sudden we're seeing you go down in terms of output productivity, it should warrant a conversation. Is everything okay? Second is the opposite of that. If there's all of a sudden that you're processing substantially more tickets or more volume, is it that you have become far more efficient in those 8 hours, which is possible? Or is it that you're working substantially longer hours, in which case a conversation needs to be had? But I use those first two pieces as a way to make sure that I have appropriate staffing levels. The second is there needs to be conversation. So in the context of supervisors, people leaders, team leaders, there needs to be coaching to those individuals to be able to identify certain signs that would warrant questions. So if Bradley is overly irritable, if there are CSAT issues, quality satisfaction issues with performance, are there client complaints coming up around any change in behavior? Those would be situations to have conversations with the individual, not accusatory conversations, but more probing. Is everything okay? Is there anything I can do? I have found more times than not, the starting of those conversations with my personnel will bring things out that you wouldn't have necessarily seen. And if you wouldn't have asked, you wouldn't have known. So I think there's an awareness to the signs that something may be causing trouble or that is troubling, and then have the dialogue. And most organizations have, a people line or a people help, at least all the organizations that I have worked with to this point. But I also think it's an opportunity too to develop a trust relationship between employee and supervisor. And I would say if we have, more junior folks on the team, it doesn't have to be a supervisor. If you notice a friend or a colleague who is suffering or stressed out, ask, is everything okay? Is there anything we can do? Is there anything the company can do? Most organizations have assets to help people.
Yeah, you made a couple of really great points there that I want to highlight. And first of all, great point about the fact that you find that 12 hours is generally the maximum that an employee can work before you really start seeing diminishing returns. Because even though mental health and the welfare of the employee should be the number one concern, if you are still maybe a security leader, somebody in a position of authority in charge of other lower level security personnel, and you're thinking about how hard can I push them, in addition to you're risking their mental health, you're also just really risking having a good result, because at a certain point in time, they're not going to be doing their best quality work. So it's really to your benefit anyway, in terms of getting better returns, to make
For
sure
sure.
that your employees are being recharged. And I think that's a great point. And you also read my mind, because I was going to ask you next about what about just sitting down with one of your employees, whether, again, you're a CISO or whether you're an MSSP, and you're talking to members of your team and just making sure they're okay. Do you find that also it can be valuable for employees to maybe have someone to go with outside of their place of employment, like an industry peer group, where maybe they can address concerns that they might be hesitant to address with somebody who's a direct authority to them?
That's a great question, and one that I've actually never thought about. So reflecting on it, I'll look at it through the mentor-mentee component first. So I push, and it's funny, I had our all hands call just 2 days back, and one of the things that I talked about was the importance of mentorship. I do think it's important for associates of all levels to have a mentor, and in a mentor-mentee relationship, it should be a bi-directional. Both parties should be learning from the other. But I have made it a point in my mentorship relationships to ask the individuals, how are they doing in life? How are they feeling? Are they excited about coming to work? Are they excited about things? So I think there's a lot of value that could be perhaps that trusted, safe place of talking about stresses and how to manage them. There's no question that post-pandemic, where there were better guardrails and boundaries around work-life balance, with so many people being hybrid and work from home, it's very difficult to disconnect. I know for myself, from my living room to my staircase to go upstairs or downstairs is my office. And I can see all the alerts that have come in from the last time I sat down. And it's difficult even for me to not go and sit down and go and hammer out some emails or respond to messages that come through, Teams or Slack. So that's the first piece. The second is I'm not aware of any, whether it be like ISACA or, the B-sides and the different gatherings that take place around the states and around the world, where mental health is really a thing that is discussed in those sessions. And as an influencer, some of those, I may actually bring that up as a point, because it's actually not a topic that I have ever been witness to, not saying it doesn't, but that I have ever been witness to. And it would be a great thing to introduce.
Yeah, it certainly could be, an important focus in the future, if there aren't a lot of opportunities for that, because it is, in many cases, a very, prevalent issue across the board for cybersecurity. Because it always just seems like there is another cyber crisis right around the corner. Since we talked about the importance of actually speaking to your various InfoSec employees and making sure they're okay, let's also talk about instances where it also might be necessary to talk to the client a little bit, because maybe in some cases you just have a particularly demanding client or customer as an MSSP that's saying, hey, we have expectations, we have deadlines we want you to meet. We've got some kind of an issue going on right now, and we need this resolved ASAP. Doesn't matter if you have a whole host of other clients that are also relying on you too. And maybe it's sometimes you really have to have a sit down with the client and set realistic expectations for them so that they're not a contributor of stress. So how do you handle that?
So I love where we're going with this. The last thing of the string that you said is the most important one, which is around expectation management. So from the time of the pre-sale of being the managed service provider up through to the start of delivery and onboarding, regular, direct, and open lines of communication are the most important thing. To me, I look at everything as a relationship and everything as a behavior. So if I'm not getting the behavior I want, it is likely due to communication and a misalignment of expectations. So I think one of the first things that has to be done to avoid this specific topic is making sure when you're crafting that statement of work that it's specific to outcomes that can be measured. Because at least then you have that piece of paper to hold both sides accountable to. I don't see that happening as often as I would like. And I'm saying that from the side of being the consumer of managed services, putting on my old role hats. It's one of the first things that I worked on changing and continue to evolve in the role that I have today. The second piece is tempers do flare up. Even if you have that document, there is still a situation. A client could be going through an incident. Somebody marks something as a false positive that was a true positive, which could heighten specific things. What I have coached my team to do, the first thing is don't overcommit something that we can't deliver. It's very easy in a situation for a client to be demanding. We agree to whatever it is that they're saying that they need done. And then, of course, we have now missed that expectation as well. We just continue to perpetuate the issue. So I've made it very clear from a top-down and then kind of bottoms-up mentality. If there's a client issue going on, raise it to the appropriate level. Even if it's an over-escalation, it gives the ability to diffuse the situation that's going on. I find when an over-escalation or escalation doesn't happen, it will result in heightened heightened frustration. The other piece is I've only had this happen once where I had a client just screaming, and I said, if this is the way that you want to treat our people, this is probably not the right relationship for us. And the individual kind of took a step back, had called me post and said, I appreciate the fact that you called that out. I've been running high stress. Everything's a bit crazy here, but you're right. I shouldn't talk to anybody that way. Not something that, again, only has happened one time in the year and 4 months that I've been here, or 14 months that I've been here. But it is a thing, and it's not anything we should tolerate. Not to say that we should match that level of frustration back to the client, but having that direct conversation that it's not acceptable is the right thing to do.
I know we talked a little bit earlier about things that you can do, particularly in a crisis situation where you might be in the middle of a major breach and, ransomware attack or something like that. But let's even just talk about, day to day when things maybe aren't in worst case scenario. So are there opportunities when things are a little calmer, but there's still a lot to do, where you can still make the overall working environment more pleasant, more positive, so that your employees are mentally in a better place, especially when things become more difficult? I'll give you one example that I think you had mentioned to me in our prep call that I'm not sure you mentioned yet today, which is you pretty much make it mandatory that everybody's got to take their vacations because they need time off.
Yes. So Optiv is wonderful in the fact that we have a no PTO policy. So what I mean by that is there's no accrual of PTO. It's kind of you take the recharge that you need. Where other organizations, PTO is part of your compensation package, whether it be 10 days or whatever. That's a benefit you get from the organization. You are not doing yourself a favor, not taking recharge, not taking your paid time off. So I would actively go through, and the good thing is at Optiv, my organization, I see everybody taking PTO. It's not a thing I've had to push. But in other organizations, it was, where I had to say, I've noticed that you've given up PTO because the reality is there's only so much you're allowed to bank and roll over. Organizations don't have to pay you out. But where I was seeing people not taking time away, I would reach out to them and say, what's going on? Why is it that you feel you can't disconnect? It's not good for you. And the other thing is, as a leader, it's not good for me. One of the great things about people taking time off is it gives me the ability to see how have they led their team. Do they have a resilient team that can, that is ready? Because that tells me that person is ready to move on to something more, more difficult, more complex. And the same thing with their team. I look at it as an opportunity to see function, process, how are things working? So it's very important, I think, to be making sure that you're active with your team on identifying that. But the same goes to visibility of the leader. So I'm very adamant about when I'm having one-on-one meetings with my team, I'll usually take them walking, or I'll be on a treadmill, in my basement. It may be annoying hearing the step, the stepping if my mic is picking it up, but they get my attention, but they also seeing that it's a priority for me. And if it's a priority for me, it should be viewed as okay for them. And it's something that it's weird. It's something that I talk about in our all hands and our town hall calls about a vacation I took, or making it a priority to work out. And like, I'll share my Apple Watch thing for anybody who wants on my team who wants to compete with me. And I'm not the most athletic guy, but I think it's important for that investment in self. So if I make it a priority, I hope that people will follow behind and make it a priority for themselves.
Absolutely. No, it's important to also, have some distractions. It's important to be able to take a mental break, have some fun, and with that, actually, I feel like that might be a good segue to a segment that we like to do called "We Speak Geek."
We speak geek.
Now, this is an opportunity for us to have a little fun here. Obviously, what we just talked about, very important. We could talk about that really for hours. As my co-host Ryan would always say, we're not going to solve it all in one day, but hopefully we gave some pointers that can really help people address this difficult issue. But now we want to sit back and have a little fun. We Speak Geek is a show and tell segment where we embrace the geek culture that people typically associate with the cyber nerd community, because at the end of the day, everybody's a little geeky about something. So, Jason, this is where I ask you, how do you speak geek?
Oh, the list of my list of geek things is quite long, from Lionel trains to wine to whiskey to watches to cars. I'd hoped to be actually doing this from the wine cellar of my basement, and unfortunately had to travel, so I'm in the hotel room. But I would say spirits, wine and whiskey are probably right now the passion that I have, which is kind of funny because we're going from mental health to drinking. I am not suggesting that one is to solve the other, audience.
Right.
But wine and whiskey are probably my passions right now. So I was able to go downstairs and get a lovely bottle of Pinot Noir as my show and tell. But New World wines, California wines are my passion.
All right, very nice. So, all right, first of all, give us a sense of, since we can't see your wine cellar, how big is your collection, or even better yet, what is your prize collection right now? Like, what is your favorite of everything that you have?
So I would say favorite varietal is Pinot Noir. As far as prized, I would say it's probably some of the bottles of Occidental or Sea Smoke that I have, which are from two different areas of California. One's from up in the, I'll just say Napa area, north of San Francisco, and the other is from Central Coast in the Santa Barbara region. Both exceptional. I've had an opportunity over the years to develop relationships with the actual winemakers, and it's a fun hobby. As far as the room itself, so it's an air conditioned room. It's probably 14 feet long, 8 feet wide. So if I were to stack bottles on the floor in case, I could hold about 2,600. And right now there's about 1,100 bottles in there. It's funny, the kids will go downstairs and be like, Dad, when are you going to drink all this? And I'm like, as a way to teach them math, as they're on the younger side of like, well, if Dad can drink one bottle a day, how many, how long will it take? And, it's like, holy crap, it'll take years. So it's a fun hobby. We do a lot of hosting of guests to our house. And what's fun for me is people will have perceptions around wine that they like because they saw it in a movie, they saw, a celebrity drinking it, or saw it on some type of TV show. And I like to play the game of, guess what it is. And oftentimes I will find an inexpensive bottle of Merlot, decant it, put it in front of them, and they think and then I'll put down a bottle of like Opus One, and they'll think they're drinking Opus. And I'm like, Nope, it's Beringer, $6.99.
Right. All right. Well, I appreciate you saying that, actually, because listen, I know there are some absolute, professional wine sommeliers or enthusiasts who really know what they're talking about. But I do feel like you need to have that kind of palate because, you mentioned whiskey too. I've done some whiskey tours. Yes. I've also done some vineyard tours, and they'll say things with the whiskey tours. And I was talking about this actually in just the last episode. Well, they'll be like, oh, well, you'll notice this one has a little taste of grapefruit, or this one has a taste of, and I'm just like, I just taste fire. That's all I can't find these little subtle, differences. And I couldn't tell you, which one of these wines is like the truly like, expensive high-end wine, or which one you can just run and get from your local, convenience store. And I feel like sometimes, people get some people might get a little pretentious about, this is the only wine for me, but they probably wouldn't know the difference if they were actually doing an actual taste test.
So I'll give you 2 tips on the whiskey side. So both things you said resonate with me when I'm talking to people about whiskey, and I have about 100 liters of different whiskeys at the house, from bourbons to the Orient, Japan, Scotland, Ireland. The first one is, if you think about the temperature of whiskey, as you cool it, i.e. ice, it closes. You won't actually get the full flavor profile. The second thing is dealing with that heat, the burn that you feel in your chest when you're drinking it. If you add distilled water through a dropper to the whiskey, the first thing it will do is cool that temperature down, the heat down as you're drinking it. But the other thing is you will notice the flavor profiles come out more and a bit differently. So for folks who want to get more into the getting those flavor profiles out, the caramels, the grapefruits, maybe the smoke, the peat, if you add just a little bit of distilled water, you'll notice it far more.
Ah, interesting. All right. Well, I'm going to make a mental note of that, because I would like to count myself among those who really can find some of those distinguishing characteristics, so I can, make myself look all very smart and distinguished the next time I do a tasting. So good advice, good tips on that, Jason.
Sure.
And I will have some photos that our viewers, if they're interested, could look at later. Yes. With you and your wine bottle, and I think you were going to try to provide us with an image of your cellar after the fact too. So for people that are interested, you can go to our website and check that out as well. But in the meantime, we're going to leave it on that. So thank you, Jason, very much. Appreciate you sharing a little a little personal side of what you're interested in, of your geekdom, and thank you also for just your very important perspectives on our mental health issue today. Such an important topic. So I really appreciate you being here today.
Thanks, Bradley.
All right, Ryan and I are back. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Jason, but that's not the end, so don't go anywhere. We're only halfway done, so please return for the second half of our episode featuring our security strategy topic of the week, Know Your Enemy, gathering intel on the ransomware as a service business model. That plus our InfoSec News rundown and our Dear Cyber for Hire advice column segment, all that coming up, so see you in a moment on the other side.